start reading, okay? I read each sentence and we'll see whether it's clear. Unfortunately, I don't have the summary because I don't have my laptop cum computer got spoiled. I have to buy a new one. And Narad is the one with whom I work on the Life Divine Internet, and he has offered to give me one. So that is still awaited. Until then, my
You're also
summary.
Gangada, you're also doing synthesis with Narad nowadays,
Yeah,
na?
yeah, we have just started. He insisted.
Yeah,
So
I think two classes have got over.
Wednesday, yesterday I had to, no, Wednesday, yes, Wednesday I had to cancel because yesterday I was slightly unwell. Okay, for half a day I was down. So I canceled class. But Saturday, yes, Saturday evening is synthesis. So we start reading, okay? This throws light incidentally on the opposition made by our minds between pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss, and abundant activity. Manifold application, the endless vicissitudes of being, consciousness and delight of being that take place in the universe. The burden of what is saying in this sentence is we see multiplicity. We see many things as separate. That's the whole point. Okay? So we'll pay attention to each word and we'll see what he's saying. So he has told you the three powers, that the consciousness, which is actually substance, which is actually Shakti, which is actually Ananda, is all one. But when they come down, the one becomes the many. It splits itself up into different things. But the splitting is apparent. It's only outward. It's not the real thing. Okay? So it's only on the surface, but deep inside it's always one. It's like the seed and the tree. The seed is the one that contains the origin of the tree. And in the tree, you see the many different fruits, flowers, twigs, branches, leaves, bark, root, everything. Different. But it contains. So this Satchidananda is exactly that. But it can take three poises. One, it can vary itself, its forms. Like the water vapor, and I'm repeating what I said yesterday, but I'm repeating. Water vapor, and ice. Okay. Or it can also limit itself. It can limit itself. It can limit its power and seem to become imperfect. And the other capacity which is there is self-absorption. It completely loses itself into and concentrates itself entirely into itself. That is the transcendent. And when it concentrates into itself, human beings can experience that. Okay, you are not aware of anything else except yourself. He has discussed that, and that there are two states of self-absorption. One is the self, supreme self, superconscient. They call it Chit Ghana. It is so concentrated that you are not concentrating on anything else. You not even know yourself. You are yourself the same thing. Knowledge disappears. That's what he has said. And the same thing is also true of the inconscient. The inconscient also is a seed form and it contains everything in itself. But the only difference is the higher is the light and the lower is the darkness. And that is the dualities. This duality is a very interesting proposition. And in the physical world, all dualities are there. It's from the highest level, it starts in light. At the lowest level, it starts in darkness. And in the middle, you have all these dualities. You have mixture of light and darkness. Okay. That is why in our opinions of people, we should never be very judgmental. Because in every supposedly wrong action, there is an element of truth. Okay. A very prominent example of this is the Subhash Bose. Okay. I'm reading now Subhash Bose entirely. I want to understand the whole thing because he is coming to light in the 75th anniversary of our independence. So we are understanding what he really was. His love of country was so tremendous and so praiseworthy that it is good. At the same time, he became a war criminal because he was opposing the allies. So it was a mixture. He had to suffer for his goodness. So that is a very good example of the dualities in the world. Okay? What one considers a tremendous virtue, the others are considering a tremendous sin. Okay. So this, now I go back to the, he said silent, but this is what Srila is saying here. This throws light incidentally on the opposition made by our minds. Our minds are half lights, they are not full light. They are not absolutely ignorant, they have got half light. Okay, they have got half knowledge. Between pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss and abundant activity. Now he certainly used the word abundant activity, meaning Shakti. Okay. Now, pure consciousness is awareness, but it is not awareness, it is something else. You have asked me to write about consciousness and I will do that. The consciousness is something fundamental. The scientists think that consciousness is created. Srila is saying it is not created, it is uncreated, it is something fundamental. It exists by itself. Scientists think that consciousness comes into awareness when an animal is created. When man has got a brain, he has consciousness. That's not true at all. It is consciousness that is creating the brain. He has said that long ago, if you remember. A fundamental difference comes up between the two views. When you look at it from below, like scientists is looking, awareness is because there is a brain and because there are senses. But that's not true at all. You can be completely conscious without brain and without senses. Okay, in the spiritual consciousness. So consciousness is the main thing. It is consciousness that is creating brain and senses. Now, look at that sense. Pure consciousness, pure existence. Pure existence, you can think of it as subtlest of substance. Okay, pure bliss, ananda, and abundant activity. He is using the word abundant because it creates so many multiplicities in the physical world. The manifold application, the endless vicissitudes of being, consciousness and delight of being that take place in the universe. The vicissitudes, the word Srila uses very often, you must understand also the highs and lows of life. Okay? Sometimes you are in a very high mood, sometimes you are in a very low mood, sometimes you are very happy, sometimes you are depressed. These are the vicissitudes. Okay? Alternating opposites, vicissitudes of being, of consciousness and delight of being that take place in the universe. So it is not only vicissitudes of being, but it's also of consciousness. Sometimes you can be very fully conscious and sometimes you can be quite unconscious. And delight of being, you can be very, very happy and you can be very depressed. All these things are in the physical world. Now Srila is saying these three powers that we have discussed of consciousness explain this. Okay, it's very obviously explained because it has got the power to reduce itself and become the opposite of itself. In the state of pure consciousness and pure being again, think of it as substance, because the substance itself is consciousness. Okay, it's fundamental. We are aware of that only. Okay, we are aware of that only, nothing else. Simple, immutable, self-existent, without form or object. Without form or object, the world is not at all available to you. You are not seeing the world at all. You are seeing only yourself. You are not even seeing. You have become the divine. If you want to use a loose word, divine, which is not very philosophical, but if you want a religious one, that's divine. Without form or object. And we feel that to be alone, true and real. So when you experience the Chit Ghana, the supramental consciousness, which can be experienced on the lower levels also. Okay, it can be experienced on the lower levels, not fully, but you can get glimpses of it. In other words, the dynamic state, we feel its dynamism. In the other or dynamic state, that means when you are in the physical world, where there is dynamism and action and energy, it's not there at a higher level. It is static light. static consciousness. In the lower world, it is Shakti that is dominant. In the other or dynamic state, we feel its dynamism to be perfectly true and natural, and are even capable of thinking that no such experience as that of pure consciousness is possible. God is not available to us at all, and we feel that the physical world is the only reality. I see a stone, it is real. I see a dog, it is real. I see human beings, they are real. How can they be unreal? Okay, so it is so convincing. So it depends at which level you are. At whichever level you are, you feel that that is the truth. Okay, this is the power of self-limitation of the powers of Satchidananda. Okay. In that state of pure consciousness, we read that just now, we are aware of that only. Simple. Simple means nothing except that. Immutable, no complication at all. In the physical world, there's complication, but not there. Simple, immutable, self-existent, without form or object, and we feel that to be alone true and real. Opposite, in the other or dynamic state, we feel its dynamism to be perfectly true. Whatever you see in the physical world is perfectly true and natural, and are even capable of thinking that no such experience as that of pure consciousness is possible. That's what the materialist thinks. Those who are religiously inclined may not think like that, but those who are pakka materialists think that no other thing is possible except matter. That theory was there in science for a long time, but that is now slowly passing away. Yet, it is now evident that to the infinite consciousness, both the static and the dynamic are possible. The static is the superior plane of consciousness, the higher hemisphere, and the dynamic is the lower hemisphere. So now, what is, and are even now, I want to, how accurate the language is, okay? Yet, it is now evident. Why is they using the word now? Because science has itself realized, okay, that the quantum theory changed entirely science's view, the quantum theory. They found that consciousness is the real element that is determining things in the physical world. There was Michael Morley's experiment, okay, which they were examining, and they found that the results of the experiment were different when you are watching it, and were different when you are not watching it. That was stunning to them. In other words, consciousness had an effect on the physical world. So that changed the entire science, became philosophy. That was the starting point. But now, since this is the word now, 100 years ago, but now in today's world, 2022, any number of scientists are getting spiritual experiences, and they know that matter is not the ultimate reality. And see how much importance is given to the word now. Okay, 100 years ago he used the word now. Now that word now is much more valid. Okay, so, if you go to the internet and check out these things, you will see that any number of scientists are getting spiritual experiences. Because why? Why do they get spiritual experience? Because of their sincerity of search. I want to know the truth. Okay, that will take you ultimately to what you want to know. Anything you want to know, you can know precisely if you have a deep, intense, and continuous search for it, you will get it. Okay? So it is now evident that the infinite consciousness is both static, higher hemisphere, dynamic, lower hemisphere. One is no movement, one is mutable. One is immutable, one is mutable. These are the two of its statuses, and both can be present simultaneously. Now that's the interesting part. In spiritual experience, you need not feel them separate. You can also, they can be present simultaneously in yourself. Deep in your consciousness, you are absolutely calm and quiet and not disturbed at all. But in the outward world, you are dealing with everything, and the results of your all actions will be based on calm and quiet. There will be no effect of your emotions or anything. Normally at our level, our emotions are affecting our actions in the world. But when you are in this state, your emotions will not affect the actions. Okay. Even if surface they exist. Okay. I'll give you one example of how at one level even emotions can be seen superficially, but inside you are calm and quiet. A very good example of that is Sri Aurobindo, when he heard the news of Mrinalini's passing away, his wife, with whom he had hardly any contact, okay, but he loved her deeply. He had tears in his eyes. So, superficially, there is emotion, but deep inside, you are not touched. Okay, and it is said, because there is a book by Niruddha, Mrinalini, okay, and she was an ordinary girl. She was not a, but she died very young because there was the Asian flu, which mother had experienced in Japan. That Asian flu killed a lot of people, and Mrinalini also died with that fever. But he brought her back into the ashram through another life. Okay, that is a different story, so we won't go into that. But it is quite. I've read that whole book, and I've seen how he was guiding her throughout his life. She was a very imperfect being. She never understood all these things that, but she felt his help all through. And there are very fantastic incidents of how he was helping her through life. Okay. But that's another subject altogether. So these are the two statuses, and both can be present simultaneously in the universal awareness. The one witnessing the other and supporting it, or not looking at it and yet automatically supporting it. So many different possibilities. Okay. Yeah. When Sri Aurobindo had tears in his eyes, you can say inside he was witnessing his own nature as though it is something else. Okay. He is watching himself having tears in the eyes, but he is totally undisturbed inside. Supporting it or not looking at it. You can say it is part of me, or you don't worry about it at all. And yet automatically supporting it, that means there is some connection between your soul and your body. It is not that you separate yourself and there is no connection at all. It can have a connection. Okay, automatically supporting it. Or the silence and status may be there, penetrating the activity or throwing it up like an ocean, immobile below, throwing it up in a mobility of waves on the surface. There is explanation of the same thing. When Sri Aurobindo is having tears in his eyes, I'm giving the example because it's wonderful. You never think that Sri Aurobindo would be moved, but it's a fact. Okay, and it's a very, very interesting fact because of the lower in the 1930s. Surely you wouldn't expect that in the 1950s. Okay, when Sri Aurobindo would never have had tears in his eyes. There would be sorrow perhaps, or an emotion, but no tears in the eyes. Okay, so now Sri Aurobindo is saying, or the silence and status may be there penetrating the activity of throwing it up like an ocean, immobile below, and throwing it up in the mobility of surface on the surface, mobility of waves on the surface. So it is possible for a yogi to be absolutely calm within and act in the world without being affected by the actions. That's how far the Gita goes. Okay. Now I read further. This is also the reason why it is possible for us in certain conditions of our being to be aware of several different states of consciousness at the same time. Okay, your body may be acting, your vital may have a different, it may have emotions, okay, but at the same time in the mind, okay, at our level, it is very possible for our vital to dislike somebody, okay, but the mind is saying, no, this dislike is not right. Why should I dislike him? That's what Siddhartha is describing. He's saying, this is the reason also why it is possible for us in certain conditions of our being to be aware of different states of consciousness at the same time. Because the vital is one station of consciousness, the mind is another station of consciousness, and they can be quite opposite. There is a state of being experience in yoga in which we become a double consciousness. One on the surface, small, active, ignorant, swayed by thoughts and feelings, grief and joy, and all kinds of reactions. The other within, calm, vast, equal, observing the surface being with an immovable detachment and indulgence, or it may be acting upon its agitation to quiet, enlarge, transform it. So both are possible. You can be in the higher level of consciousness, calm and quiet, and you are watching the one below without being disturbed by it. This is the ascetic reaction to life. Life is full of imperfections. I don't care for it. I go away. You are watching, but you are not disturbed because it's not real. But now instead of saying another possibility is there. The higher hemisphere silence will say to itself, no, this dynamism and the wrong movements in the lower hemisphere is wrong. I want to correct it. That's what he's saying. See, carefully read. I'll read the sentence again. There is a state of being experienced in yoga in which you become double consciousness. One on the surface. Now note the words, very imperfect, surface, small, active, ignorant, swayed by thoughts and feelings. All our thoughts and feelings have a deep effect on us. Okay, it disturbs you. Okay, grief and joy and all kinds of reactions. And the other condition, the other within, calm, within or deep inside, calm, vast, equal, observing the surface being with an immovable detachment or indulgence. How Srinath is so accurate. You can be absolutely detached from it, or you can be indulgent towards it. You may feel, okay, it's all right. That is also part of me, but it's imperfect. Okay, indulgence, or it may be acting upon an agitation to quiet, enlarge, and transform. In other words, I want to draw your attention to those including of all possibilities. One possibility, you are identified fully with the silence of the higher hemisphere and you are watching your lower hemisphere without being bothered by it. Number one. Number two, you are looking at your own anger and your jealousy and your dislike of people and you say, this is not right. Okay. But it's okay. That's the nature of the physical world. Indulgence. Okay. Very interesting. Or the third possibility, no, I won't be indulgent. I don't want it. I want to change it. So Srinath is giving all the three examples. Okay. Acting upon the agitation to quiet, enlarge, transform it. So too, we can rise to a consciousness above and observe the various parts of our being, inner and outer, mental, vital and physical, and the subconscious below all, and act upon one or other or the whole from that higher status. You have some power from the higher status, even on your mind and your vital. You can change it to a certain extent. But in the spiritual planes of consciousness, your power is not entire. You can change to a certain extent. Okay? A yogi, when he is in the spiritual planes of consciousness, certainly his behavior will change. Okay? He can make it. I give you one very interesting example of how Srinath was able to use that power to even change in the body. Okay? One day, Champaklal saw his eyes were red. There was a hemorrhage and the eyes became red. The hemorrhage in the eye is nothing very serious. Okay? It disappears sometimes. I had once my eye became absolutely red. And my doctor told me, Yasmin, you should know this. It cleared in 3 days' time, it completely cleared up. No effect on the sight. So, there was that, Srinath told Champaklal, come back after 2 hours and see. And when he came back after 2 hours, the redness has completely gone. So, Srinath with his yogic power had completely dissolved that redness in the eye. Okay. So here's an example of how you can act from the spiritual place of consciousness on your vital, your body and your mind also. But the power is not full. Okay, it's only self, but it is power. And then, so too we can rise to the consciousness above and observe the various parts of the being. Note the word observe. You are a witness, okay, without emotion. The, a witness in a judicial case is supposed to tell the truth. Okay, so when you use the word observe, you are not affected by what you observe. Okay, the various parts of our being, inner and outer, mental, vital, and physical, and the subconscious below all, even subconscious you can see, and act upon one or the other or the whole from the higher status. It is possible also to go down from that height and from any height into any of these lower states and take its limited light or its obscurity as our place of working, and while the rest that we are either temporarily or put away or put behind or else kept as a field of reference from which we can get support, sanction, light or influence, or a status into which we can ascend or recede, and from it observe the inferior movements. Now, this is a very interesting thing. It's the language is pretty obscure, but if I give you examples, you'll become absolutely aware of what he's saying. He's saying, in other words, that you can station yourself in the higher hemisphere, okay, and not bother about the lower. But suppose you are bothered about the lower, you have the power to come down into the lower with full intention of limiting your own consciousness and your actions, okay, and station yourself there and act, okay. This power is there. I'll give you two examples and you will understand why Sri is saying this. One example is when Ramakrishna experienced the impersonal aspect of consciousness, okay, he used to constantly remain in that condition, high, and in the physical world, he is either in trance or is not interested in anything in the world, okay. But the Divine Mother told him, listen, you can't be there all the time. You are a human being produced in the physical world and you have a work in the physical world. So you have to go down into the lower consciousness and be there and act from there. You can't remain all the time up. So you have to go down. So how does he go down? He creates a small desire, okay, and a harmless desire. And desire is something that will pull you down, okay. So he said, "Ami jal khabo." Okay, that is one example, okay. But there's another story which is even more telling, and I'll tell you that. Okay, so and when he used to say "Ami jal khabo," his consciousness used to be anchored to the physical, into the lower hemisphere, and from there he would teach his disciples and he would interact in the physical world. Okay? But when that desire is not there, his consciousness will shoot up into the nirvana consciousness. Okay? So it's a problem to come down, to pull yourself down. Okay? So this is what he used to do. The other example given is that he used to be all the time bothered about the food that he had to eat. This is a story which I have not come across directly, but it's told by somebody else. He used to go on asking his wife, okay, what have you cooked for dinner today? What have you cooked for lunch? Okay. And she used to feel that what is this fellow? He is a yogi and he is a divine, he is even an avatar. And why is he bothering about food? And why is he showing this desire? Okay, I can't understand this. And she would not appreciate it also. But precisely that was the point which he understood later on. That was keeping him rooted to the lower hemisphere so that he could do God's work in the lower hemisphere. Now, is that an interesting detail? Okay, he is pretending to be desirous of food, but actually there is no such desire at all. What he is doing is he is creating a condition where he can come down and anchor himself to the lower. If he does not anchor himself to the lower, he will go up. And he won't be acting in the physical world. Okay. Now, I read that sentence again. With this example, you will understand what he's saying. It is possible also to go down from that height. There you are, coming down into the physical world. and from any height, okay, or into any of these lower states, and take its limited light and its obscurity as our place of working. So when you come down, you are subjected to the limited light, okay, limited light of the mind, and the obscurity also. You are subjecting yourself purposely to a limitation as our place of working. I have to work in the physical world. I'm being commanded to take a position in the physical world so that I have work to do there. While the rest that we are is either temporarily put away or put behind, or else kept as a field of reference from which we can get support, sanction of our light, influence, or as a status into which we can ascend or recede, and from it observe the inferior movements. So all these things are possible. You can either completely bring yourself down into the and accept the limitations of the lower, because then you can't work in the, if you don't have the limitations, you can't work in the lower. So you take that purposely. Now Srila is giving other examples also. Or we can plunge into trance, get within ourselves and be conscious there while all outward things are excluded. That's a Chit Ghana consciousness that we spoke about. You are conscious only of your divine nature. Not the physical world doesn't exist for you. You are even body, mind, life, no consciousness at all. You are in trance. Or we can go beyond even this inner awareness and lose ourselves in some deeper other consciousness or some high super consciousness. Now that's very interesting. What's he saying? He's saying that when you are in the super consciousness, even there are two possibilities. One possibility, you are fully aware of yourself. But what is this yourself? You can go beyond yourself and merge and become the infinite Sat, and you can become the infinite consciousness. The individuality has disappeared completely. Okay? That's what he's saying. That also is possible. That's what the Buddhist ideal is. Merge yourself into where you came from. Don't worry about the physical world. Okay, that also is possible. When you are having a cosmic consciousness, who is having the cosmic consciousness? The individual, the Jivatman. Okay? The Jivatman is having the individual consciousness. It has lost its ego, and yet it is aware that I am experiencing the cosmic consciousness. Okay, but even that I am experiencing can disappear. You can become the impersonal infinite. And when you become the impersonal infinite, no individuality, no ego, no limitation. The individual disappears completely. That also is possible. That's what Srila is saying. See how many possibilities he is talking about? That's why. Or we can plunge into a trance, get within ourselves and be conscious there while all outward things are excluded. Or we can go beyond. Okay. This word or, Srila uses very, very often. Even in poetry, in Savitri also he uses the word or. Okay. Giving different, you wouldn't expect the word or to occur in Savitri. But he uses that. Okay. Or we can, another possibility, okay, we can plunge into trance, get within ourselves and be conscious there while all outward things are excluded. Or we can go beyond. Even this inner awareness, even the inner awareness go away and lose ourselves in some deeper other consciousness or some high super conscience. Individuality completely disappears, you have become the infinite. Nobody is there to experience the infinite. There is also a pervading equal consciousness into which we can enter and see all ourselves with one enveloping glance or omnipresent awareness, one and indivisible. Now this is a very interesting phrase. There is also a pervading equal consciousness into which we can enter and see all ourselves with one enveloping glance, you are aware of everything, or omnipresent awareness, one and indivisible. One day, Mother said, You can know the divine fully when you know the divine fully as everything. When you know all at the same time. Okay? Now that's interesting. When you know all at the same time, all means the lowest and the highest. Okay? When you know all at the same time, you know the divine. Now, in the context of this, you see this, and you'll see what he's saying. There is also a pervading equal consciousness into which we can enter and see all ourselves from the bottom to the top with one enveloping glance, and a glance that completely embraces everything, enveloping, right from the top to the bottom, and omnipresent awareness, one and indivisible. Omnipresent awareness. The awareness is not only limited to one level, it is omnipresent, right from the bottom to the highest. This is exactly Mother's experience of what she said. I think it was a New Year message. I don't remember. You can know the divine when you know all at the same time. This is what she said.
It is the New Year message of the year 73, Rangada.
Okay. So
When you're conscious of the whole world at the same time, then you're conscious of the divine. Maybe my words are a bit here and there.
exactly. So this sentence explains that. Okay. He's using different words, but it's the same thing. Okay. Mother's statement. What did you say? Number which year?
73, last year.
Oh.
I mean, when she left the body, yeah. That's why I remember it.
Yeah, that's right. Because at that time she knew what is to know the divine, no? So all this which looks strange and abnormal or may seem fantastic to the surface reason, acquainted only with our normal status of limited ignorance and its movements, divided from our inner higher and total reality, becomes easily intelligible and admissible in the light of the larger reason and logic of the infinite, or by the admission of the greater illimitable powers of the self. The illimitable powers of the self, he has described three powers to you. The spirit in which in us, the spirit in us, which is of one essence and infinite. Okay. So it is a very interesting paragraph where there are so many different possibilities, and he is describing that. In other words, he is saying that the divine is not limited at all to goodness, virtue, infinity, not at all. He can make himself absolutely the opposite of himself. He is not only light, he can become darkness. All that is also divine. Okay. All the possibilities that are there come into existence. Okay. I find while I was reading this essay, all these examples came to me, and I find it very interesting. Okay. So the next one is a big para. So how much time do we have? 28. So we have 10, 12 minutes. Maybe we can read it. 1.5 page.
Suki Lady has to read.
Yes, I will read.
Go ahead.
Brahman, the reality, is the self-existence absolute, and Maya is the consciousness and force of the self-existence. But with regard to the universe, Brahman appears as the self of all existence, Atman, the cosmic self, but also as the supreme self-transcendence of its own cosmicity, and at the same time, individual universal in each being. Maya can then be seen as the self-power, Atma Shakti, or the Atman. It is true that when you first become aware of this aspect, it is usually in a silence of the whole being, or at the least in a silence within which it draws back or stands away from the surface action. This self is then felt as a status of silence, an immobile, immutable being, self-existent, pervading the whole universe, omnipresent in all, but not dynamic or active, aloof from the ever mobile energy of Maya. In the same way, we can become aware of it as the Purusha, separate from Prakriti, the conscious being standing back from the activities of nature. But This is an exclusive concentration which limits itself to a spiritual status and puts away from it all activity in order to realize the freedom of the Brahman, the self-existent reality from all limitation by its own action and manifestation. It is an essential realization, but not the total realization. For we can see that the conscious power, the Shakti, that acts and creates is not other than the Maya or all knowledge of a Brahman. It is the
Fly. The fly was sitting there. You think it was
Okay, there is small difference. But go on reading. Sunki, go on reading.
okay, yeah. It is the power of the self. Prakriti is the working of the Purusha, conscious being active by its own nature. The duality then of soul and world energy, silent self, and the creative power of the spirit is not really something dual and separate, it is a biune. As we cannot separate fire and the power of fire, it has been said, so we cannot separate the divine reality and its consciousness force, Chit Shakti. This first realization of self as something intensely silent and purely static is not the whole truth of it. There can also be a realization of self in its power, self as the condition of world activity and world existence. However, the self is a fundamental aspect of a Brahman, but with a certain stress on its impersonality. Therefore, the power of the self has the appearance of a force that acts automatically with the self, sustaining it, witness and support, and originator and enjoyer of its activities, but not involved in them for a moment. As soon as we become aware of the self, we are conscious of it as eternal, unborn, unembodied, uninvolved in its workings. It can be felt within the form of a being, but also as enveloping it, as above it, surveying its embodiment from above. Adyaksha, it is omnipresent, the same in everything, infinite and pure and intangible forever. This self can be experienced as the self of the individual, the self of the thinker, doer, enjoyer, but even so, it always has this greater character. Its individuality is at the same time a vast universality, or very readily passes into that, and the next step to that is a sheer transcendence, or a complete and ineffable passing into the absolute. The self is that aspect of the Brahman in which it is intimately felt as at once individual, cosmic, transcendence of the universe. The realization of the self is the straight and swift way towards individual liberation, a static universality, a nature transcendence. At the same time, there is a realization of self in which it's felt not only sustaining and pervading and enveloping all things, but constituting everything and identified in a free identity with all its becomings in nature. Even so, freedom and impersonality are always the character of the self. There is no appearance of subjection to the workings of its own power in the universe, such as the apparent subjection of the Purusha to Prakriti. To realize the self is to realize the eternal freedom of the spirit.
That completes the para, and we will have to read it next time. So, and we will discuss it. As usual, Shankar's language is very, very terse and full of pregnant meaning. Each word we have to see what he is saying, and then we can understand what he is saying. But basically, what he is saying is that don't think that the divine and matter are different. Matter also is divine. Okay? There is no difference between the two, and you can position. If you go to the highest level, you have maximum power. You can put yourself at any level. At the lower level, you don't have the power to put yourself. You have to first go up, and that's why Sandra says ascent. And then you have developed the power to come down and come down fully into the lower to work, do God's work, or you can position yourself in the higher. Okay. It depends on what you want to do and what is your swadharma, what is your work in the physical world. If you are supposed to do a particular work in the physical world, you have to limit yourself. Purposely, you limit yourself with full awareness of what you are doing. As I told you, you create a desire, an artificial desire, and you remain down there. So that was what Mother was doing in the last days of her life. She was fully working at the physical level. She was changing even the consciousness of each cell. We are not even conscious of our own consciousness. We don't know that mind and vital and body have different consciousnesses. We can discuss about it, but we don't know it. But Mother was working on the consciousness of each cell. Imagine to what level she had gone. Unbelievable. The world will come to know all these things only 100 years later. But the work she has done is unbelievable. Okay, so we stop here today and we'll continue with this next time. Okay, Life Divine.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please do that. Read.
You know, the third status is of self-absorption. So, if you see that in science, there is a black hole which has such intense gravity that
Yes.
it absorbs everything into itself.
That's right.
So, is there a similarity between a black hole and the self-absorption of the divine or the transcendent?
Absolutely. That is a perfect example of, and what Siddhartha means, everything in the physical world is a symbol of the divine. So the black hole is a perfect example of Chit Ghana. You are aware only of yourself and you don't allow your consciousness to go out. The black hole does not allow any light to go out of itself. It absorbs everything. And therefore, you can see only when light comes out. But in a black hole, nothing comes out, so you don't see it even. Okay, that's why it's called a black hole. Perfect example of what you're saying. Yasmin, absolutely correct. But that corresponds to only one aspect of the divine. Okay. The black hole is the Chit Ghana. And strangely enough, it's a very interesting example because Chit Ghana is full of light, but the black hole is full of darkness. Because it completely absorbs all the light into itself. Not aware of anything else. Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Thank you for everybody. Okay, same to you.
Thank you.